This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it. Guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Welcome to the Parent Footprint Podcast with Dr. Dan. I'm Dr. Dan, your host, and let me tell you about our mission at Parent Footprint. That mission is to make the world a more loving and compassionate place, one parent and one child at a time. We believe the key to raising happy, healthy, and engaged kids is for us parents to seek the same in our own lives: happiness, health, and engagement. We believe that awareness is the foundation for your vision of successful parenting, and with increased awareness and intention, we can be purposeful about leaving a healthy footprint on our children. Today's show is called Words of Wisdom from a Former Bad Mother. Don't you love that title? And we are going to be talking about our guest's new book called Parents Under the Influence. And that guest is Cecile David Weil, who is French and American, publishing her first novel called Crush. And The Suitors, her third novel, was published by Other Press in 2013. She's a regular contributor to the online French news magazine Le Point with the column entitled Letters from New York. Cecile was born in New York, where she currently lives. Cecile, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. Thank you very much for having me. I really love your podcast, so it's a treat.
Oh, thank you. So there's just titles that just, of course, grab you, and then also, of course, speak of just true honesty and authenticity, and you just put it all out there by labeling yourself a former bad mother.
Yes. Well, in fact, my children joke about this and say, "You're boasting. Why do you say former?" So, so anyway, the thing is, I think as a parent, I think it's a constant preoccupation to think, am I doing right? Am I a bad parent, a bad mother, a good mother? And I know that this question has really obsessed me to an unhealthy point, because it led me, in fact, to be very much focused on myself and my flaws instead of looking at my children. And that happened to me one day. I stopped, I don't know for what reason, probably one day I really looked at my children. And it was well into my motherhood. My children, my eldest child, my son, was 14. So that's to say it's never too late, because then instead of focusing on myself, I suddenly looked at them and I saw that they were not happy, not thriving, and probably I was doing really things wrong. And so that was the starting point of a real, aha moment, not a happy one, but a really very, very important one for me, because I started thinking, I have to find out where did I go wrong? And I had to, to really think, what could I do to make it better?
What did you, so that's a huge awareness, and as you said, a painful one.
Yes.
I can relate to that constant feeling of, am I being a good parent? Am I being a good parent? And there's so many involved parents these days that just want to do a great job and not only not mess up our kids, but we want our kids to be happy. And so there is all this pressure. So to actually, and a lot of us, I think, just want it to be okay. But you had this moment where you're like, it's not okay. I got to do something different.
Exactly. And it was very painful, all the more that, as a young mother, I thought I was going to be a good mother. I thought I had everything, the love, the willingness to be, a good parent, the benevolence. I had put all my energy trying to be a good mother. So, I thought, then I started being a parent, and I discovered it was more complicated than I thought, because, in fact, I felt I hadn't the free will that I thought I should have. For instance, I realized I wasn't really in control of what I was doing. For instance, when I wanted to be firm with my children, I often ended up cuddling them. And when I wanted to be patient and understanding, I ended up yelling at them. So that was a very disquieting way of discovering that I was not in charge, that probably my emotions were. But at that point, I was so distressed by this discovery and so afraid of being, in fact, a bad mother, that I only compared myself to others, tried to do my best, and in fact, try to act as a good mother. Since I thought probably I was flawed and I didn't do things right, I was a little ashamed, and I couldn't really talk about it with other people, because as soon as I said, I think I'm a bad mother, the people I was talking to said, no, of course you're not. And of course, they were right. I wasn't the bad person harming shamelessly my children on purpose, but I was having bad results. And that's why I was a bad mother. And I was probably a bad mother because I was trying too hard to be a good one, which is very unfair, but it is true that the road to hell can be paved with good intentions. So that's one of my first mistakes, I think, was not to stop at first at that impression of being a bad mother and of not being in control, but just putting my distress in the back of my mind and, in fact, playing the role of a good mother, faking it until I made it.
Nice.
And I didn't realize that children are not at all, they can't be fooled. And they read us. They feel everything in a visceral way, and they felt I was faking it. And in fact, they thought I was faking my love for them. In fact, once my younger daughter said to me, "Mommy, why do you pretend loving us?" And that was terrible. And what I realized after, once I have been after that moment of realization, I tried, I began a long journey trying to understand. So I read, I met shrinks, psychiatrists, I really did a big work that brought me to write this book, because it was 15 years of thinking and reflection. But, the moment when they said, you're pretending to love us, I realized that in fact, children read us so well that it's no use to pretend anything.
Right.
And that in fact, I wasn't doing what I thought was going to make them, balanced, to have a mother that was doing everything right. That in fact, the silent relationship between a mother or parent and children is far more important than the one that is said. And the words and the gestures that I was doing could be good when they were, because they weren't always good. But even when they were, it didn't do what I thought it would do. It didn't quiet them. On the contrary. Right. And also, it gave them an example, a very bad example, of someone who is disconnected from its true nature, my true nature, which was to be anxious and not knowing what I was doing, and in fact behaving in a kind of self-sacrifice way, forgetting myself, my own goals, to try and do my best in a very erratic way, and it wasn't a good example.
And I want to pull apart two themes of what you just shared with us. On the one hand, how important it is for us to be authentic and real, and our kids know when we're not. Right. So it'd be nice if we could fake it to make it. But most of the time, particularly as our kids get a little older, it doesn't work. And so they get confused. And in many ways, they'd rather have our real angry, anxious self than our pretend happy, everything's fine self, because that's just going to make them feel anxious, like something's wrong. So that authenticity is so important. And the other thing that you said, which I want to highlight, is that, like, most of us, you came into parenting with the idea that I am going to be a great parent because I am going to love my kids. And we know that love is foundational for healthy attachment, for security, for confidence, for loving oneself and when loving other. However, love is not enough because, to say this harsh reality, parents who love their kids abuse their kids. And it's not because they don't love them. It's because of whatever has happened in their life, whatever the circumstances are, they still harm their kids. And so we need to do so much more than just love. We need to be aware. And you set out on this journey in all of the offices and couches and reading and all you did to, it sounds like, become aware, particularly as I read in your work, of past traumas and experiences and how that comes into our parenting.
Yes, exactly. And in fact, to rewind a little bit about the fact that you can't fake it, the nice and the good news that I found out is that you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be everything wonderful as long as you're real. Because it allows also your children to be not perfect as well.
Right.
Otherwise, we're all pretending to try to be perfect, and we can have a real communication. So that was kind of a relief. And I'm saying that because I thought that if I was to go and dig into my own imperfections, I was going to only find out that it was worse than I thought. In fact, it was the opposite. The more I digged to find out what I should do, it was only good news. It was only being more what I was in a true way, and it was less difficult than what I had tried to achieve. So, and about love, it's true. I mean, we have those common beliefs about love, and the thing is, we know from other relationships that love is not enough. I mean, in a marriage, in a passionate relationship, we know that we can be abusive, we could be harmed, we could be harmful, and that love is not enough. But I think, as many people, I was so afraid of this idea that then if we are being sensitive to hidden emotions also in parenting, like we are in our love life, and all those things being related to our past emotions in childhood, then it's very disquieting, because for me, being a parent was the most grown-up thing I could do. And so I was supposed to be in charge, in control, and mastering everything. Whereas, of course, parenting is, as the rest of life, subject to our story, what happened to us. And in fact, I knew a bit of that. I knew that I was aware that unconscious mind was something that was going to play a role. But then I didn't realize to what extent. And also, I thought I had found a really perfect solution for this. I thought that doing the opposite of my parents, what I didn't like about their upbringing, was going to be enough for me to not reproduce what harmed me as a child. And this is something that I really I did interview lots of people for this book. And as I said, it was a 15-year kind of a journey. And I really met a lot of parents who, like me, did this kind of, in a very solemn and secretive way, promised themselves, like in a vow, a solemn vow, not to do the things that had been harming them as kids.
Right.
And in fact, it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work. No.
First of all, it's very difficult to achieve this because it is the unconscious mind that is actually very often ruling us in our knee-jerk reactions when we are in reactive modes. It's really not our very bright and thoughtful person who has been reading all these wonderful books about parenting. It is really the wounded child in us that often is the person reacting. So it is very difficult and to achieve. And even when we try, we think we are doing the opposite. In fact, it's probably not a good idea. For instance, my parents were a generation of French parents who didn't really value being there a lot for their kids. They were busy. And it wasn't the generation where they actually, realized the actual parent footprint, as you would put it, that we have as parents on a child. So they were very kind and everything, but they were not very much present in my life. So I figured, okay, I'm just going to do the opposite and I'll be there constantly with my children. Well, the more I can, because of course I had a job also, but the more I could.
Right.
And in fact, what I realized much later was that it wasn't a good idea because in fact, I didn't know how to be with my kids because I hadn't had this example when I was a kid of being and interacting with my parents and bonding with them. So I didn't really know what to do with my kids. And in fact, I was with them, but I was not engaged. And so they felt as lonely as if I wasn't there. So in fact, I reproduced the exact same thing as my parents with the opposite strategy, but in fact, I reproduced it as well. So this wonderful idea that I thought I had to do the opposite was in fact a total dead end. And at one point, hopefully, I had to look into this.
Which is a huge awareness, right? Like that is a huge awareness. And you just outlined so beautifully the process of increasing our own awareness and how it actually happens. How we are always, how we were parented always impacts how we parent, whether we do the exact same, whether we do the exact opposite, or whether we take a little of this and we do and a little of this and we don't. It's all based on what we liked and what we didn't like. And then we make assumptions that this is what's going to be good for our kids. However, the next thing that you did along the road here, which I just want to highlight because it's so important, is you actually took an inventory and you looked at data. And in this case, it might have been the data of the looks on your kids' faces, their emotions, how much they were thriving or not thriving. And you said, wait a second, I did the opposite. It's not working. I need to figure out what to do differently and why.
Yeah, exactly. And the first step for that was, as you say in your podcast, self-awareness. And I didn't think self-awareness was part of the job as a parent. I never would have thought that. Because for me, it was about doing things right. It was not about knowing myself or acknowledging what had been difficult for me in my childhood, because like many people who were not really abused in a spectacular way. I thought I would be indulging if I looked at my past and say, "Oh, poor thing, you were not that happy." But, compared to all the suffering in the world and everything, I didn't think it was a good way to go, and I didn't think it was an adult way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I saw, like everybody else, like a movie like Citizen Kane, or the guy is almost becoming president, but at the end of his life, he's only talking about the rosebud, the inscription on his childhood sled.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, I didn't think that my childhood, I had to, analyze the grip my childhood had on myself. Because in fact, the suffering doesn't resist to the actual analyze of what happened to you. And it doesn't mean you should say anything to your parents who did their best.
Right.
It's not about, pointing fingers and saying that was bad. It's about really acknowledging abuse, even if it's subtle or not much. And one of the abuses that I found out about writing when I wrote this book and interviewing people and psychiatrists, and one of very subtle one could be things like parents who, project an image of a happy kid or very good student or any kind of image, even if it's a positive one, and maybe especially also if it's a positive one, it's a more tricky thing, because then the kid doesn't really is not confident when you say that, because he knows it's not true. It's not the qualities that he actually has.
Mm-hmm.
It is unrelated to him, to that kid or her, and in fact, it makes that kid feel insufficient, and it's really a kind of an abuse that I wouldn't have thought of before doing that research. So no wonder that if that could be difficult, all kinds of things that all our parents did and we did as parents, which is a little bit more like yelling in a car when nobody is doing anything wrong, or those things can be a little traumatic. And it's the first step was for me to look into this and look into what I had suffered from, realizing that in fact I was totally reproducing. And the car thing is absolutely what I did. I mean, I don't know why, but I kept being really upset when my children were loud in the car, which wasn't really bad, but it hit a nerve or something, and I probably yelled at them until one day I realized that's exactly what my father did with me in the car. And the moment I realized this, it changed everything, because suddenly I could recognize when I was doing this, I'm doing what my father was doing. And then I tried to come up with alternative behavior, like what could I do instead of yelling? After all, they're not doing anything wrong. And little by little, I did manage to change and actually have fun with them, trying to find what could be the best way for them to quiet down, because I didn't like them being loud. So acknowledging that I didn't like them being loud, even if it's not, it was like that. And it could be changed. And that is so hopeful, because when you catch yourself being unfair and doing the same exact things that your parents did,
right,
you're so disquieted, you think you'll never turn it around. And the thing about this book I'm so happy about it is because it's really hopeful. Because if I could do it, everybody could.
Yeah.
And I'm happy I did, because, I really nearly missed out on the joys of being a parent and raising my children well. So it really was a big deal.
And you did turn it around. You had adolescence and you did turn it around. That's the hope.
I did. And I even think now that even if my children were adults, I could have still changed a great deal about what I did wrong. And of course, I apologized, which is an amazing tool because then I didn't need to be perfect. I just needed to acknowledge what I was doing wrong and apologize. And so they knew they were not the culprits. They were not those who were doing anything wrong. When I was yelling in the car because they were loud, they were just loud. I was the disturbed one who found it horrible. So it really did put them off the hook. And so they knew they just had a difficult mother, which is very different from being guilty of something or being bad kids, which most children think when they're being scolded.
You know, we are living in a world of worry and anxiety. I mean, it really is an epidemic these days, and for lots of very valid reasons. There's a lot of stuff going on in our country, around the world, and it oozes, unfortunately, and understandably, to our kids. And you say something in your book that I want us to spend a little time on, because so many of us as parents are dealing with worry and anxiety. And in terms of this concept of love, you talk about, despite, common thought, worrying is not a form of love.
No, exactly. And it was really a surprise for me to discover this, because of course, it expresses your concern for your children to be worried. So you think it is linked to love, and that probably it is love. And also, you have around in our society, it is really valued to be worried for your kids, to the point that when you don't, you're considered as bad parents or unconscious parents. And so it is also something that is valued as a testimony and of a proof of your sense of responsibility as a parent. So both internally and externally, you are pushed in that direction of worry. And even if you can't really help being worried, that I know, I've experienced it, but it is very different when you know you're doing something that is wrong for your kids than when you think you're expressing love. And when I realized I had to put a handle on my worry because it was actually harmful to my kids, and I understood why, it changed everything, because of course I continued to worry, but I didn't express it so much, or I apologized when I got a little bit too far in my worry, which is also very different. And the way I understood how worry could be bad is when I understood that, in fact, children sense our state of mind more than what we say. And as I did experience myself when they told me, why do you pretend to love us? So they actually feel the negative emotion of worry, and they think it is because they are not capable of overcoming whatever is worrying you. So they think that they are in fact responsible for this worry, and they become also very anxious if to understand that we don't believe in them. We don't believe they're able to walk up a staircase when they're very little, or to, go to school on their own when they're whatever age we decide they should. And it is, in fact, the worst even is not only that they believe that they are not enough and they're not doing things right, since we are afraid for them, but also it makes them fail, which is really horrible. For instance, in my book, I talk about a father who is, in fact, very worried about his son not going to, do well at his exams. And that son of his was a super good student. So people around him didn't understand why he was so worried. But the thing is, the son ended up failing because it was, of course, very weird in a rational way, but very understandable in a psychological way. Because we are the same. If I have a project and I go to a friend and ask that friend, what do you think about my project? Mm-hmm. And that friend only expresses worries, I am probably not going to do it or do it badly. But if I find someone who is really very understand the project and in fact encourages it, it gives me all the chances of succeeding. And it's the same for children. So feeling that worry is something you should really monitor closely. That's what I understood. And in fact, it is true that it works much better for kids when sometimes I have tests to not see my children, even when they're now grown ups, not to express my worry, because right. I know I'm capable of transmitting that bad,
right.
that bad impression, and it could harm them.
Yes, and that's the message for everyone to hear, is that we have to be aware of our own anxiety, because when we have a worry about our child walking downtown by themselves, or walking over to a friend's house, or riding their bike, or taking the public transportation by themselves. Now, of course, all of these have caveats with, where's your geographic region? What time of day is it? How old is your child? What is their developmental age? All that is there. But what we don't realize is, with our worry, real or not real based on circumstances, yes, we are giving them messages that we don't think they can do it. They probably shouldn't think they should do it either. And the world is kind of a scary place. Right?
Exactly. And I did all those mistakes, and my children ended up anxious that I wasn't telling them the truth about what I was feeling, anxious about my worry. And so all the love I had it was not enough to compensate all that anxiety I was giving them without knowing. Mm-hmm. So the wonderful thing is that the minute you realize things can change dramatically. Mm-hmm. That's what I experienced, and it's like magical. Because, as I said, you don't need to change really everything. It's enough that you apologize when you're not changing and saying it's your own struggle.
Yes. And again, that's the hope, everyone. It's not too late. It's never too late. Just becoming aware, working on yourself, sharing this with your child, apologizing, changing a behavior that's authentic, that sticks just as much as the other ones that you're trying to slowly vanish or go be an earlier part of the story. And the other thing that this is leading me to is asking you about how you view independence, fostering independence, as you talk about, on their developmental schedule. And this is a thing these days too, is like how, kids are growing up slower. Kids who have neurodiversity also have their own timelines of independence. How do you view all of that?
Well, it's true that there again, we have the internal anxiety, and then we have the external pressure. That is, how come your son, your daughter is not doing this yet, or whatever? And it's also anxiety that pushes us to be proactive and to think that we are the ones who has to do the whole parenting thing without listening to the input of our child. And it's something that has to be done with them, because they all have their own pace, as you said, their own abilities and their own ideas. So, for instance, some children really they bloom late, and they could be really leading us to a lot of anxiety. Like, I don't know, what if my daughter never gets to have children because she doesn't want to engage in a love life and she is 30? Or do you think that, my son, it doesn't work at school and he is going to have trouble having good grades to do the good thing for the college and everything. So, and the thing is, the only thing I learned is that you have to wait for them to be interested, to want what you obviously would want them to do, which is to flourish. So you have to let them be in their own pace and their own ideas, which is in fact very different than what you would have thought of. And it is true that as a parent, we tend to be, of course, super benevolent, very bright. We know a lot of things, so we think we are right.
Yes.
But it's not because we want them good that we are right. And I mean, as most parents, I wanted my children to be doctors, lawyers. And in fact, the two friends of mine I have in France that have succeeded the most, one is a landscaper who started as a gardener, and the other one did shoes and ended up being a huge shoe brand. So you don't know what it is that your child is going to want and choose, and when.
And we need to separate ourselves from that process as well, correct?
Exactly. And that is super painful.
Yeah.
And it is much more painful and difficult than actually offering them different internship things and intervening constantly for them to be in the right path that we think they should have, because doing so, we quiet our anxiety, but we're not doing things right by them. So it is more difficult to stay with our own anxieties, like, I hope my daughter is going to end up having a kid at last if I want to have grandchildren and I want her to have a full life. But then I have to not be sure, and I have to step back, and I have to, to just hope for it. And usually the thing which is nice is that when we did our role as parents and we did transmit everything that we had to transmit during the bonding that I ended up knowing how to do with a little bit of lesson and effort, then usually they are not totally different of what we thought we wanted for them. Even if they are doing not the kind of job that we thought in maybe in a different country, they are the person that we wanted. They are. If we have the idea that our children must have values, they are not going to turn out as horrible persons. They may be not what we thought they would be, but they are persons with values, and that's the most important.
Absolutely. The values that are the most important. And I often talk about in my office and in giving talks is the difference between the forest and the trees. And we are often caught up in those trees, the get out of bed, do your chores, do your homework. And really the forest is these larger issues, like what's important to you? What's important to the family? Are we raising compassionate people? People who feel valued, who have confidence, who have empathy for others. And we just get lost, it seems, in the day-to-day grind of life.
Exactly. And that is another thing that really relieved me so much is to think that I should only pick my battles. And after I have set my priorities, I didn't have to have perfect kids that did everything good. The homework, the food organic, and the very good room, everything being very tidy. You have to choose. You can't have perfect children. So you have to choose what is important for you, for them to be and to do, and that's enough.
Yes, you guys, you hear that? That is enough.
It's a relief.
It is a relief. And so to reiterate, you don't have to be perfect. If you were able to achieve that thing that is not achievable, that would actually not be good for your kids. You need to be human. You need to know that you're going to make mistakes. You need to know that it's never too late. And sometimes enough is enough. We just need to be.
Exactly.
Okay.
And we need to have a life that we are happy with because we lead by examples. And if we're miserable in whatever we do, thinking that we're doing the right thing, but we are terribly unhappy, it really isn't a good lesson. And it shows because usually they do the same.
Exactly, which you just sort of just consolidated Parent Footprint so wonderfully. And I love that. Just the idea of who we are matters, what we do matters, and the energy we bring to our lives matter. Because just like you found, you didn't even realize you were doing what your parents were doing in the car and yelling at your kids. You didn't even realize you were copying that thing that you actually never liked. It's just kind of, we get this through osmosis from our parents. We pick up on these things and we are going to replicate them unless we can be purposeful and intentional. And that leads us right to the Parent Footprint moment question, Cecile. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So tell us about a time when you became aware of yourself as a parent or an individual, and this new awareness had a positive impact on your child.
Well, in fact, this whole book is exactly that. Yeah. It is the result of the moment where I realized my children were not happy. But to be more precise, because I had a few, as I was telling you about my children asking me if I was pretending to love them. But one moment that I was really ashamed of and that really felt horrible, but led to a wonderful outcome is I always loved music, and I said to my children I love music, and they were doing sing. My son was singing in a choir, and I went to listen to him, and he was very happy about that. But the thing is, I was probably I like music, but I probably didn't like what my son was singing because I didn't find he was Pavarotti or something. But I pretended that what he was doing was wonderful, which is not a good thing to do. And when I was at that concert from the choir, I felt asleep. And I was on the first row, and he was watching me. And I can't tell you, it was so terrible for me because I was caught really being a bad parent. And I was so ashamed, and I was really terribly sad to have, made him sad. But then I realized after that it was all about me being ashamed of myself, all about me being ashamed of not doing the right thing. And in fact, not being true, that in fact I couldn't care less if he was taking music because I didn't think he was made for this or he particularly liked it. And it was not the right interaction. It wasn't real. It wasn't true. And so at that point I thought, let's stop trying to do everything like it's supposed to be, in your mind, because it was just in my mind. And it helped me tremendously. All the things that I did wrong at one point hit me like to make me on the right path to change and to acknowledge that I really needed a big change.
That is a whole lot of awareness you were processing a whole lot of awareness, and thank you for processing it, because not only, of course, the benefits for your children and your own life, but now all of us can benefit from your knowledge that you're imparting to all of us. And it's just such an honest, real, and just for everyone to be able to say like, hey, I can grow, I can change, and it's not too late. And it's okay for us to not do things well and to make a mistake and to say, you know what, I blew it. And thank you for that story, because, right, that's like a parenting's nightmare, right? Front row. Here we are to be great parents and support our kids and be excited. And and that's not what happened. And it was one of the many turning points. So everyone, you need to check out this book, Parents Under the Influence, Words of Wisdom from a Former Bad Mother. And not only will you feel good about yourself, you will gain wisdom on so many different topics about how to spend time with your kids, how to foster independence, how to have your own time, right? How to manage your worry, how to be aware of your own childhood and the impact it has on your parenting. Just a wealth of knowledge. Cecile, tell everyone where they can find your book and follow your work.
Oh, that's very nice. I have a website that is ceciledavidwill.com, and otherwise any good bookstores, and of course all the internet places where you could buy the books, and that's it.
Right.
I'm usually a novelist, so it's my first time, in cursing and going to parenting, and so it's not a lesson that I could give further. I put all my heart in this, and I really hope it could help. Yeah.
Well, thank you for doing it for all of us. And thank you for being on the show today and sharing your experiences with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dan. Thank you. It was wonderful talking with you. Thank you.
That concludes our show for today, everyone. Listen to Cecile's words. You don't have to be perfect. It's never too late. You can do this. Being real, being authentic, being honest with your kids, and listening to your kids and what they want and what they tell us. As always, try to be that person you want your child to become. They're always watching, they're always listening, and they are always absorbing our energy. You know where to find us, www.parentfootprint.com. Subscribe to our website, tell others about it, and help us with the mission to create a more loving and compassionate world, one parent and one child at a time. And as always, ask yourself the guiding question, what footprint do you want to leave?